Boy, do we have a big update in a case involving a Georgia 9th grade teacher accused of sexually abusing one of her own students.
Why do men have to be so creepy sometimes?
This teacher's name is Danielle Weaver, and she was pretty outspoken on TikTok. She showed a lot of personality on social media. She seemed to be that fun teacher who students could look up to, that teacher who perhaps they could relate to. But now she is facing decades in prison for what she allegedly did. And we just got our hands on the grand jury indictment. And frankly, the details of what Weaver allegedly did to one of her own students are sick.
11 charges, 4 separate dates, and a single Snapchat message that a mother found on her son's phone at 2 a.m. That's what sits at the center of the new indictment against a Texas middle school teacher who built a huge TikTok following by being the cool, relatable educator everyone trusted. Boy, do we have a major update in a case that started with whispered rumors in the hallways and has now turned into something even seasoned investigators are calling deeply disturbing.
The last time we talked about the teacher we're talking about today, Danielle Weaver, we knew that she was in big trouble for what she allegedly did. It was back in February, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation had been called in to investigate her and investigate whether she had molested one of her own students. But at that point, the details surrounding what she allegedly did, that hadn't been released. We just knew that she was going to be facing charges potentially. But all of that now has changed in the wake of the documentation that we just got our hands on in just the last day or so. And Weaver is now facing 8 charges, including multiple counts of child molestation. Police are alleging she sexually abused a student multiple times. That not only includes multiple times allegedly on school property, but even in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant. Now, before we dive into the new details we have on this case, let's go back a little bit and very quickly show you what allegedly led up to all of this.
In one video we pulled from her account before it was scrubbed, you can hear her telling a classroom full of students, "You guys are the reason I get up in the morning. I'd do anything literally for you." That clip, which felt heartwarming just weeks ago, now carries a weight that is frankly hard to stomach. This teacher's name is Danielle Weaver, and she taught 8th grade English at Willow Creek Middle School in Henderson, Texas, a small town about an hour east of Dallas.
She appears to have been very active on social media. She was a 9th grade teacher at Lee County High School in Leesburg, Georgia. This is a small town. It's outside of Albany, Georgia, if you know the state, about 2.5 hours from Atlanta. Now, Weaver's school, and it's her former school now, had roughly 1,400 students. And Weaver, on a personal life standpoint, appears to have been married at the time of her arrest. So she was a wife. And I'll get into why was is a key part of that here in just a moment. But very sadly, she's also a mom. And this is someone who had a child of her own and is now accused of sexually abusing a child. On social media, Danielle had pictures with who appears to be her husband, and he is taking action against her in the wake of her arrest and where this criminal case has gone. Now, speaking of social media, I want to show you this.
She was pretty outspoken on TikTok, posting everything from classroom pranks to personal pep talks. She showed a lot of personality on social media. She seemed to be that fun teacher students could look up to. The kind of person you'd want your own child to have in a tough middle school year. But now she is facing up to life in prison for what she allegedly did. And we just obtained the grand jury indictment. Frankly, the details of what Weaver allegedly did to a 4-year-old student are sick. We're on the case here at the Crime and Consequences. The last time we talked about Danielle Weaver, we knew the Texas Rangers had been called in. The whispers were that an 8th grader had made an outcry, but the specifics were sealed tight. That all changed yesterday. The indictment out of Henderson County lays out 11 felony counts against Weaver, including multiple counts of aggravated sexual assault of a child and improper relationship between an educator and a student.
Why do men have to be so creepy sometimes? I am leaving Burlington. All I have to do is go in there and return something, minding my own business, okay? And then I'm walking out walk into my car minding my own business. And this man that was walking in just started talking to me like he knew me and asked me, "What kind of vape you got?" I didn't have nothing in my hands. All I had was my purse strapped around me. I said, "What?" He said, "What kind of vape you got?" I ain't got no vape.
So previously, we knew the investigation against Danielle Weaver started in February. That's when law enforcement was brought in. But now we are learning about her alleged crimes, and they appear to have happened, and again, all of this is alleged, weeks before that. So let's lay out this new information we have from the grand jury indictment out of Lee County Superior Court in Georgia. So this indictment lays out what Weaver allegedly did, and it goes count by count. There are 8 counts total, and count 1 alleges that in Weaver's classroom, so we're on school property here, it says that she did commit an immoral and indecent act to and with the victim who is under the age of 16 with the intent to arouse and satisfy the sexual desires of both said accused and said child by kissing and fondling him, and it continues on. Now, count 2 alleges similar activity, but this time it happened, quote, in the school store. Both of these alleged incidents happened sometime between January 20th and January 23rd. So those are 2 alleged sex acts that took place on school property. Then you have count 3 that alleges that Weaver sexually abused the same student on January 24th in the parking lot of a Sonic fast food restaurant. Then January 26th, Weaver allegedly sexually abused that student in her car in the parking lot of their school. Now, that is the 4th count of child molestation that Weaver is now facing. And then there's 4 other counts, and those all are for the charge of sexual contact by employee or agent in the first degree. And those charges do match up with the dates and locations of the alleged sexual abuses that happened in the previous 4 counts.
Police are alleging she abused the same boy 4 separate times over a span of just 8 days in March of this year. And the locations range from her own classroom to her personal apartment. Now, before we walk through the new details that made our stomachs turn, let's go back a little bit and show you what allegedly led up to all of this. Danielle Weaver's TikTok footprint made her a mini celebrity inside that school. One video that parents have now flagged shows her lip syncing to a song about a forbidden crush, with the caption, "When the connection is so real you forget all the rules."
I want to show you this because this is Weaver with some of her students, it seems, posting on social media. And this is a post talking about how students should dress appropriately at school. Weaver did appear to be that fun teacher. And we all probably had a teacher like this growing up, someone who might be a little bit younger, someone who you can relate to, someone who you can potentially confide in and trust in a way that maybe an older teacher can't. Seems like she brought a lot of great energy to the classroom of this high school, to the 9th grade classroom that she taught in. And she doesn't have a massive age gap compared to some of the other cases we've seen involving teachers accused of sexually abusing students. But in this case, it is incredibly notable because she is roughly 30 years old. And this victim, we have learned, is allegedly under the age of 16. Now, even though she may seem like that teacher you can trust, these allegations are laying out that, if true, that certainly was far from the truth.
At the time, most people saw that caption as a harmless joke. But in light of the indictment, it now feels like a warning sign hidden in plain sight. Danielle Weaver was 29 years old, married, and the mother of 2 young children when she was arrested. That contrast makes these allegations even more disturbing. Online, she built the image of a fun, approachable teacher, regularly posting classroom videos and interacting with students. According to court records, the alleged victim was just 14 years old. The indictment claims the abuse escalated over 4 separate encounters in only 8 days. On March 10th, prosecutors allege Weaver kissed and touched the student over his clothing inside her classroom after school. 2 days later, they say the contact escalated inside a supply closet next to the classroom. Then, on March 14th, investigators allege she drove the student to a nearby city park, where she engaged in oral sex inside her SUV. 3 days later, on March 17th, prosecutors say she took him to her apartment, where they allege sexual intercourse occurred. Those final allegations carry first-degree felony charges that could result in decades behind bars if she's convicted. Investigators believe those dates are significant because surveillance cameras at the park allegedly captured Weaver's SUV entering and leaving during the same time frame mentioned in the snapshot messages investigators has later recovered. Beyond those 4 incidents, the grand jury added 7 additional counts of an improper relationship between an educator and a student, meaning each alleged act can be prosecuted separately. Prosecutors also say investigators are examining a possible earlier incident involving another student. Although no charges have been filed in that matter, the case began to unravel on March 18, when the victim's mother checked her son's Snapchat and found messages describing what had allegedly happened with Mrs. Weaver. The messages referenced both the park and the apartment, and included a statement that Weaver told the boy she was more mature than her husband. The following morning, she contacted school officials, and by March 19, Henderson police had opened an investigation before the Texas Rangers officially took over the case.
So we know that police were first called to investigate on February 3rd. And then the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the statewide agency, they were called in to investigate the next day. But it wasn't until February 17th that GBI filed warrants for Weaver's arrest. Weaver then turned herself into the county jail on February 18th, and she was held on a $50,000 bond, and she was able to post that, and she's been released. Now, reportedly, according to WALB television, her bond conditions say that she can't have any direct contact or indirect contact with the alleged victim, be within a mile of that alleged victim. It also says she cannot return to any education facility for someone under the age of 18 in Lee County.
They executed a search warrant at Weaver's apartment and recovered a comforter that matched the description the boy gave in a forensic interview. A warrant for her arrest was issued on March 24th, and Weaver turned herself in the following day. She was booked on a $200,000 bond, which she posted with the help of a local bail bondsman, and she has since been released under strict conditions. She cannot contact anyone under 18, cannot go within 1,000 feet of any school, and must wear a GPS monitor. Now, the school district stated to parents that reads in part, "We are aware of the serious allegations involving a former staff member. Upon learning of the concerns, we acted immediately to separate the individual from students and have cooperated fully with law enforcement. The safety of our students remains our highest priority."
In a statement to parents obtained by WALB, the Lee County school system said this, quote, "Reports and rumors are circulating concerning alleged inappropriate contact between a teacher and student in a Lee County school system. We at the 9th grade campus can confirm that there is an ongoing legal investigation involving law enforcement concerning the alleged conduct of a former staff member who is no longer working for the district. Upon discovering the allegations, school and district leadership acted immediately to ensure the safety and well-being of students, as well as to conduct a thorough investigation. The individuals who have been directly affected have been contacted. The district will continue to cooperate with law enforcement as well as with those affected to ensure that no obstacles to resolving the investigation exist. The safety and well-being of our students remains our highest priority. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us." So that is from the school system back in February, around the time that Weaver was arrested.
That statement is standard. But here's the question many parents in Henderson are asking. Was there anything earlier that should have raised flags? Ask yourself how a teacher who posted about protecting kids from creeps. Yes. We found a TikTok where she warns girls to watch their drinks at parties. Could allegedly do this. And whether anyone in the building saw boundary blurring behavior before the outcry. One student told a local news station that Weaver often kept certain boys after class to help organize the supply closet. That practice might have been innocent. But in hindsight, it's a detail the civil attorneys are already circling. Speaking of civil exposure, Weaver's personal life is unraveling in real time. According to court records filed in Henderson County, her husband initiated divorce proceedings on March 26, one day after her arrest. The petition states the marriage has become insupportable and requests sole custody of the couple's 2 children, both under age 6.
How these cases impact so many people. Not only do you have the alleged victim and that victim's family and what they're going through, but you also have the people who are closest to the person who is now facing charges in this case. Danielle Weaver is a mom, and that's a child who, if all of this is true, will be impacted in some way, I am sure, by all the attention surrounding their mom. But also, Danielle Weaver was married at the time of her arrest. And it appears, according to court records out of Georgia, that her husband filed for divorce in the wake of her arrest. The filing was put in on February 19th, so that's a day after Weaver turned herself into authorities on the charges, including child molestation. That was back in February. Now, the document alleges that Weaver's husband left her on February 5th, which is the day after GBI was called in. And the filing also says the marriage is irretrievably broken. Weaver's husband filed for custody of the couple's children and for possession of the couple's home, according to those court records out of Lee County Court.
That filing also reveals a small but telling fact. Every date the indictment lists for the alleged abuse corresponds to a day when Weaver's husband was traveling for work, something his attorneys appear to have documented deliberately. It's a piece of evidence the prosecution will almost certainly note at trial. To understand how these charges might play out in court, we're joined now by former sex crimes prosecutor and child abuse specialist Marie Calloway.
Related to the civil proceedings in this case since March, and it is unclear at this point when Weaver is next due in court, now a couple days after she has been indicted on those 8 counts. Now, the divorce filing makes no mention of the criminal case against Danielle Weaver. Joining us now to talk about this is former sex crimes prosecutor Dan Shore. Always great to have you here on Law and Crime. What do you make, like, now that we're seeing what a grand jury has indicted Danielle Weaver of? And of course, these are all allegations and she's innocent until she's proven guilty.
Marie, always good to have you. Marie, now that we're seeing what a grand jury has handed down, what stands out to you about the structure of this indictment? Well, Chris, the first thing that jumps out is the escalation pattern. You have kissing and overclothes touching in a classroom on the 10th, moving to skin-to-skin contact in a closet on the 12th, then to oral sex in a vehicle on the 14th, and finally sexual intercourse in her home on the 17th. That's not random. It suggests a grooming timeline where the offender tests boundaries and increases intimacy when the child doesn't immediately report it.
That's more specific, saying it happened on the 24th. What does that tell you potentially about how these allegations came forward?
It's really hard to tell. I've prosecuted and investigated many situations like this, and usually when it involves an underage person and a teacher or someone else in authority at a school, it's reported by somebody else, maybe another person at the school or a parent or guardian of the alleged victim who reports it. I don't see that many where the underage person themselves is the first person to report directly to law enforcement. Often they will tell someone else who then reports to law enforcement, but we certainly don't know in this case. And then when there's an ongoing series of sexual interactions, as is alleged here, it's very common that people don't always remember the exact dates that they occurred if they were over a certain period of months. So it's common in cases like this to say, oh, this incident I know happened on this date because, you know, this specific location is memorable. Other interactions, especially if they happened in school and you're in school all the time, you may not remember specifically what date they occurred on.
The fact that it all unfolded within 8 days tells you how quickly these dynamics can accelerate once the adult has established emotional control. What about the evidence we're hearing about, the Snapchat messages and the park surveillance? How does that shape a case like this? It's powerful corroboration. In many child sex abuse cases, it comes down to the victim's word. But here, you have contemporaneous messages describing what happened while it was still fresh, including a direct quote from the defendant about the child being more mature than her husband. That's not just corroboration. It goes to the defendant's state of mind and her awareness that what she was doing was wrong. And the park video placed her car there with a passenger during the exact time frame the victim described. That's the kind of digital confirmation juries find very difficult to dismiss.
Only the first step that an investigator or law enforcement does. Not every part of a building has coverage for law enforcement to get footage. So certainly that's something to look into. Now, if there's not security footage, what other evidence might there be? Well, certainly was the younger underage person, were they talking to other people in contemporaneous manner about what happened? So maybe they were telling friends, telling family, and maybe this text messages I've seen in cases I've had where they text a friend that something just happened with this teacher or authority figure at my school. And that provides some corroboration of what happened. And then also the law enforcement attempt to interview the defendant. And we don't know much about that, but usually they'll try to talk to them. Sometimes, we've had cases, Chris, we've talked about where someone confesses and admits to it, and sometimes they don't. So those are some of the things that people look to. And also other people in the school who might have noted interactions between them that may.
Now, each of the 4 core incidents carries both an aggravated sexual assault charge and an improper relationship charge. Can she be sentenced on all of them? Potentially, yes. Texas allows for stacking sentences for separate criminal episodes, even if they involve the same victim. A judge could order her to serve time consecutively on each of the 4 aggravated counts. Even at the lower end of the range, that could mean decades before she ever sees a parole board.
So for each actual alleged incident, there might be multiple charges because it falls under different categories in the criminal law. And usually if someone is convicted, they'll receive a sentence that goes along with the highest range of sentencing for that particular range of charges for that incident. So you're not going to get consecutive time for that incident if there's multiple charges. Usually and by consecutive time, I mean when you serve a certain sentence and you start serving another sentence. However, each individual incident, you could potentially get consecutive time. In other words, you will serve one sentence, then another and another. So if there's 4 different incidents, that is much more significant in terms of conviction and sentencing than how many charges there are for each individual action, because usually those run together concurrently.
The improper relationship charges might run concurrently, but the main threat is the cumulative exposure to the first-degree felonies. You've prosecuted educator misconduct before. How common is it to see this lightning-fast grooming period? We used to think grooming took months, but with social media and constant access via messaging apps, the timeline can be compressed dramatically. A teacher who projects the cool, safe adult persona can bypass a lot of the normal suspicion filters. And that's what makes this so hard for parents. The very qualities that made Weaver seem like the teacher you'd want for your child are the same traits that allegedly allowed her to isolate and manipulate him.
Coming off mean and unapproachable is probably not going to be able to groom someone. So unfortunately, because I don't want people to be overly paranoid about friendly teachers, because there's a lot of friendly teachers who are amazing, but certainly those are the people who are in the position to be trusted. And I've talked about this on your program before, how often in cases of child sex abuse, it is the person who is trusted the most who is the person who is engaging in sex abuse. The stranger danger stereotype of just a stranger assaulting someone does happen, but it's much more rare than a person in a position of trust taking advantage of that trust. And I think
it doesn't mean every friendly teacher is a predator. Not even close. But it does mean we need to teach kids that no adult, no matter how much they seem to care, should ever ask them to keep secrets or engage in physical contact behind closed doors.
Sure. Well, first of all, in many cases that I've investigated and prosecuted, it is the teacher or authority figure who does seem very friendly, who does seem very approachable, who is most likely to be found having done something inappropriate. That doesn't mean that every friendly teacher is sexually abusing people, because that's obviously not true. But sexual abuse by authority figures, by teachers, almost always does not happen instantly. There's not just someone who starts engaging just in sexual contact. Usually there's a period of ingratiating themselves to the student, and then this boundary probing where they are getting more personal in terms of what they're talking about. And then maybe there's some touching that's not sexualized touching specifically, but might be touching on the shoulder or other ways. So there's a grooming period that often leads to the sex abuse. And who's in a best position to groom someone like that? Someone who is friendly, is approachable, the person who is.
And what about the school's liability, given that 2 of the alleged acts took place on campus? That's going to be a major focus. The district will argue that they had no knowledge, but plaintiffs' attorneys will scrutinize every prior report about Weaver's conduct. If another staff member saw her with the supply closet door closed and a student inside and didn't say anything, that's a problem. If administrators brushed off a parent's comment that she was too close to certain boys, that's a bigger problem. I expect there will be a Title IX investigation and very likely civil litigation before this is over.
In a different way, but certainly it's understandable why someone would want to get divorced if their spouse was accused of having sexual contact with someone who was under 16 at their school.
And then from the civil side, I mean, we often see, and I don't know of any lawsuit at this point that's been brought against the school district or whether that's a lawsuit that would have any merit. But we do know 3 out of the 4 alleged incidents were on school property, once in the classroom, once in the school store, and then once in a car in a school parking lot. How does that impact? Because you still have a student, every single one of these incidents, who's the alleged victim, and whether it's on, a Sonic, parking lot or it's at a school. I mean, how much does the location of the incidents matter when it comes to any sort of litigation a school district could face?
Well, the fact that it happened on school property certainly might affect the exposure of the school to litigation. And some of the big factors that would be considered are, what did the school know? What should they have known? What were their policies and procedures like? Did they have a culture at the school where people who might have seen suspicious activity would report that? It's really hard for a school to just be liable just because a teacher did something if there's no way they could have known that the teacher was doing it. But many schools that I've conducted investigations for, we found that there was suspicious activity reported and the school either ignored it or didn't put it through the proper procedures. And that led to maybe the teacher feeling emboldened to continue to sexually abuse someone. And that's when there's...
These cases aren't just legal stories. They leave lasting scars on everyone involved. The victim, whose identity remains protected, had recently been selected for his school's Student Leadership Council before the alleged abuse began. His parents say he now rarely leaves his room. According to investigators, he even threw away his favorite hoodie because it reminded him of the day Weaver allegedly told him she was falling for him. That detail isn't part of the indictment, but it reflects the emotional damage these allegations have left behind. Behind every charge is a young life that may never be the same. The impact extends beyond the alleged victim. Weaver's own children are now growing up without their mother at home, while divorce records show her husband says he did not know the person his wife had become. Whether the evidence ultimately supports every allegation will be decided in court, but there's no denying the lives affected reach far beyond a single courtroom. We'll continue following every development in this case as new information becomes available. And next, we'll turn our attention to another disturbing investigation out of Florida involving a social media savvy coach, where a single email reportedly uncovered a pattern of allegations no one had connected before. You won't want to miss that one. We'll see you next time.
And we'll see what happens next in this case. Very, very disturbing allegations against this teacher out of Lee County, Georgia. Dan Shore, I know you write about a lot of these types of situations, both fiction and nonfiction. Where can people find your work?
Sure. My latest novel, which is about sex abuse of underage people at a school, my novel is called Open Bar. It's available anywhere where books are sold. And you can also find more information by looking for me on Substack.
Yeah, really important work. I mean, again, I just think that these stories are really important to talk about because it just, it shows so many warning signs, but hopefully not in a way where people become paranoid because there are so many great teachers out there. Dan Shore, former sex crimes prosecutor. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Chris. It's always good to talk to you.
That will do it for